And welcome back, America. Hey, listen, Dr. Grace is up next. She's got some great stuff to bring to the plate. I can't wait to get her on. Before I do, let me tell my audience, for those of you that watch Christian programming, and I know a lot of you do, the cable networks, etc., I'm flying out to Costa Mesa, California next week to be interviewed by Pat Boone on TBN on Praise the Lord, their big, that's kind of their mothership program there. And so anyway, he's called and wants me to come out there to talk about The Rabbi Who Found Messiah book and the story and what's happening around the world with that and what's happening in Israel particularly. So I'm really excited. I'm very honored about that. Now, I don't know when the show will air. It's going to be live to tape in the studio, and then it will air sometime after that. So I'll be back in the studio Friday with you, next Friday, and hopefully I'll have some information to give you on that so that you can watch that particular program when it comes up. And again, we're in the second hour now, and in the first hour, I told the folks, today I was on for an hour of the Peter Boyle Show, KNUS, out of Denver, Colorado, with him, talking about the Zulo, Obama revelations, et cetera, and he's invited me back next Tuesday for another hour, and that'll be at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, so you can tune in there on the internet if you'd like. But in the meantime, you can hear the interview I did with Peter Boyles this morning, and you go to ppsimmons tube and look under the latest videos, and it's one of the very latest ones up. It's that segment is there for you to hear. In the meantime, let's go to the phone lines because Dr. Grace is in the house, coming to us from the Eastern Seaboard, Washington, D.C., and Boston, and all along the Eastern Coast there. But Dr. Grace, of course, she is a correspondent to Freedom Friday and has been for a long time. She is the host of her own show, American Heartland, with Dr. Grace. She's also the editor of the Politics and Culture section of the World Tribune. Dr. Grace, thank you for being with us, and I understand that there's a big story in the World Tribune right now about ISIL hitting one of our airplanes. Tell us about that. You know way more about it than I do.
Well, Carl, thank you for having me on. And one of the things that World Tribune does well is we cover foreign affairs extensively, and we have a lot of sources within America's intelligence community.
Yeah.
Now, I think the American people understand that the situation in Iraq is a complete mess. But when you hear this story, you're going to see just how much of a mess it is. Apparently, we have been told that one of our U.S. F-15 was struck in August with anti-aircraft batteries that ISIL had captured from Iraq.
Wow.
Now, fortunately, this plane was damaged, but it managed to land safely in neighboring Turkey. But why is this story so important? By the way, this story is going viral. It's a straight-out news story, but it's just breaking all kinds of records for our news site.
Where can people find it, Grace?
They can find it at worldtribune.com, and the title is simply ISIL hit U.S. F-15 with anti-aircraft batteries captured from Iraq.
Okay.
Why is this story important? Well, Carl, I don't think the American public has fully grasped what has happened there on the ground. Right now, we are in a campaign of airstrikes against ISIL. These airstrikes are going to be expanded by this president. And we are facing, guess what? American anti-aircraft batteries against our very own planes.
Wow.
That's why this is a big story. This is absolutely shocking. So the very type of weapons to shoot down planes out of the sky that we gave the Iraqis to defend themselves, those very weapons are in the hands of ISIS. Can you believe that?
Well, yes, I can, but I'm speechless. I'm in shock. I'm devastated. But it doesn't surprise me.
It is devastating because it means that so much of the resources we gave the Iraqis, not only have they been squandered, which perhaps, we could stomach that, but what makes this story really devastating is that now our weapons are going to be used against our boys. Now, this plane was struck. One of our planes, an F-15, was struck, but it managed to land safely. Do you think that that's going to happen indefinitely throughout this campaign? No.
Yeah.
Our weapons are first class, and sooner or later, those weapons are going to strike down our boys. It's only a matter of time, and I think this is a tragedy of the highest order. It shows to you the magnitude at which this president has bungled the Iraqi campaign.
Right. Right. So that's the very latest. What kind of kickback, what kind of feedback are we getting? Has the administration answered to this yet? Are there any remedies being proposed?
Well, the administration is keeping this quiet. Look, this is a report. We are telling you we're really plugged into the intelligence community. The mainstream media hasn't really reported on it very much. They're trying to diminish and protect the extent to which this president has made a colossal mess of the whole situation. Now, having said that, the American people are on to him. He's trying to turn around his dropping poll numbers. A vast majority no longer support the president in his foreign policy. And he did, unveil a new strategy. What is this strategy? Well, this strategy has so many holes in it. The strategy is we're going to use airstrikes to go after ISIS. Not only are we going to use these airstrikes in Iraq, but we're also going to use these airstrikes now in Syria. So this president, who was supposed to be the president of peace, has not only made a complete mess of Iraq, not only are we going back into Iraq, but now we have to open up another theater of war into another country, which is Syria.
Right.
And I've told you many times that I'm a hawk in foreign affairs. I think that America has to use force in order to preserve peace. So I'm one of those people that generally think, yes, you've got to be very, very vigilant around the world. But what I fault this president for is, first of all, he lost all our gains in Iraq, the ones that we had previously secured. So he's a completely ineffective commander-in-chief. Now we know that so many of the weapons we left there are the very weapons that are going to be used against us, which is going to make this campaign extremely difficult. And then to top it all off, he keeps insisting that there's going to be no, quote-unquote, boots on the ground. This is a complete and utter lie. First of all, we have 1,600 troops already on the ground, and I don't care what word you use to say what they're doing or not doing. It's very clear that there are boys and they're on the ground. The president is trying to say these are advisors. They're not actually going to be in combat operations. But, that's one giant lie.
Yeah.
First of all, what you're going to see is over time, there's going to be more and more troops pouring in. It's inevitable. There's going to be more and more of our boys going back there on the ground. And they will be engaged in combat. There's no getting around it. How on earth are they going to be able to direct the airstrikes indefinitely? Right. And the president is saying, we want to use proxies on the ground. That's how we're going to win this war. We're going to use the Kurds. We're going to use the Iraqi forces. And I think the American people are on to him. I mean, what Iraqi forces are you going to use? Which ones?
Right.
The ones that just dropped their weapons
and run? Yeah.
And ran?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what we're building this whole strategy on?
Right. You might as well call in France's army for that. I mean,
I know, it's just such a pipe dream. So he's lying to the American people.
Yeah.
Look, he made such a mess of it. Now he doesn't know what to do. Now he has to appease his anti-war base, and they don't want troops on the ground. But he has to do something. So he's again conducting a war of half measures. And we see with the story that World Tribune broke, this war of half measures against first-rate military equipment is going to be a very difficult war.
Right. Isn't there a lot of dissension among the top brass in the military brass?
Oh my goodness. And now that all the stories are breaking now about what's going on behind the scenes. America's military top brass is really annoyed and frustrated with this president. They keep telling him, coming up with policies and plans that are going to secure victory, and he bungles it. And now there's open dissension. There's just leaks left, right, and center with America's military top brass saying that, it's a mistake for the president to say there's not going to be any combat troops. First of all, what would you tell your opponent what you're going to do or not do?
Right.
It's our prerogative to exercise whatever means we choose in order to win a war.
And that's what he should be saying. That's what he should be saying. They say, what are you going to do? It's my prerogative as commander-in-chief to exercise any force and any means necessary to win this, and win it we will. That's all he needs to say.
Exactly. And so the military top brass is saying, first of all, it's just very poor delivery of a speech from a commander-in-chief. It keeps saying, no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. You don't do that. You don't tell the enemy what you will or will not do.
Exactly.
For crying out loud, we have the nuclear bomb. You have to be able to threaten all means necessary, and I'm afraid that's how you achieve peace. It's by threatening that you're going to do possibly anything, so you better gets healed.
Right. That's right. Well, listen, I can think of a very famous president who would answer questions like that. Well, what are you going to do? Well, we'll do whatever we need to do. Well, will you use nuclear weapons? Well, that's a possibility. You know who I'm talking about, Ronald Reagan.
Oh, I sure know. The one that they call dumb, right?
That's right. And they were terrified of him. Yeah.
And they were terrified of him. And this man that they call so brilliant, nobody's afraid of. So we've got to ask the question, who's the dummy, right?
That's right. That's right. And I've got to tell you, Dr. Grace, either this is one of the most inept president in my lifetime and perhaps in the history of our nation, or there's something nefarious going on purpose. And I can't quite put my finger on it. I lean more towards a lot of this is being done on purpose. But if it's not, then this guy is an absolute moron.
Yes, and I said this a couple of months ago, where I used to kind of enjoy speculating which was the real issue. Is he just incompetent or is he evil?
Right.
There came a point where it becomes really irrelevant because the facts are so damaging and the situation is so bad that it really doesn't matter what the primary motivation is. What does matter is that we see that what he is laying out is simply not going to work and that we have to do something, to oust him. So we've said that many, many times, but just to emphasize right now his strategy. Okay, so what are all the problems with it? There are so many problems, it's mind-boggling. So he says that we're going to use Iraqi troops to win this war, which I'm saying to the American people is a flat-out lie, which the military brass is telling the president it's just not wise for you to be saying that. And also, they're also saying, look, eventually we may have to send combat troops. It may be that they're the only ones that are going to be able to get this job done. And one thing I want to emphasize to all the people listening is I used to be the editor of a section in the Washington Times called Base News, where I was in constant communication with our troops on the ground in Iraq and in Afghanistan when they were training the Iraqis. And they kept telling me it is so difficult to train these forces. And the American people don't know how long it takes and how difficult it is. So now the president thinks that somehow these Iraqis who just fled and ran are going to Shazam. They're going to be able to fight a brilliant a brilliant ground campaign with only 1,600 of our troops on the ground in a matter of a couple of years, when for 8 years they were trained by thousands and thousands of troops, and they fled and ran. It is just preposterous.
Right. No,
you're preposterous.
You're absolutely right. You have nailed it again, and we've got to take a timeout. We're up against a timeout. Grace, earlier in the show, in another segment, I was talking about the fact that the CIA director, John Brennan, he is a converted Muslim. In the 1990s, he was a CIA station chief in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and he converted to Islam. And then, of course, Obama comes in as president, and he places a Muslim as the head of the CIA. And, of course, Islam, practices and teaches taqiyya, the Islamic directive that you can lie, you can deceive in order to protect Islam. So the CIA director is a Muslim who is directed by his new faith to lie and to deceive. Now we've got Obama coming out and saying, well, ISIS isn't really, that's not really Islam. And then you got John Kerry coming out in an interview just a couple days ago saying, our struggle is against ISIS, the enemy of Islam. What do you say to all of that?
Well, Carl, you're raising a brilliant and fascinating point that I don't think we've discussed enough in our country. In his speech, Obama said outright, he said, that we have to also, part of his strategy is to counter the ideology that we're fighting against. But, he never explained what it is. And the only thing he sought to do was to try to differentiate ISIS from the Islamic faith. But the American people have a lot of questions about that.
Right.
And even people like Bill Maher, I did a whole segment on my show on this, Bill Maher, who is no fan of the right and no fan of conservative ideas.
Right.
Bill Maher had a debate with Charlie Rose in which he said, look, we've got to talk about the Muslim faith honestly. We're not saying that every Muslim is a jihadist, an active jihadist terrorist right now, blowing people up.
Right.
But he said, we've got to speak frankly about the faith. There are elements within the Muslim faith that condone, justify violence.
Right.
And that is a big difference between the Muslim faith and the Christian faith or the Buddhist faith or other religions.
Or the Jewish faith.
Or the Jewish faith, where there is an absolute injunction to not resort to violence. In fact, in the Christian faith, we have to turn the other cheek, right? I mean,
right.
That's part of a key tenet of ours. Well, here in the Muslim faith, in many instances, violence is used and used with their own religious sanction. Violence against homosexuals, violence against women. There's just and the whole principle of jihadism is rooted in the actual approval of violence within the faith.
I would say strapping bombs to your children is violence against children.
Indeed it is. And so I think that we need to have a large discussion, and a discussion where we can toss away political correctness and say, well, wait a minute, the Muslim faith is indeed different than other faiths. It's radically different. And, okay, we want to say that ISIS is despised even by many Muslims because many of Muslims are the victims of ISIS. That's true. But there are definitely elements within the Muslim faith that give rise to this kind of violence everywhere around the world. And I think we have to talk about it frankly, as does the Muslim community themselves, because this is, it's tarnishing their image, you might say, because it's very clear that there are elements therein, and these individuals themselves, they say that they are Islam, right? They say that they are Muslims. They say that they are practicing Muslims.
Oh, yeah.
They believe that these violent actions will give them a seat in the afterlife. So they are using the Quran, like, openly to justify their deeds. And I think that if we're going to counter the ideology, as the president says, we have to look at the elements in the Muslim faith that are giving rise to such barbaric behavior.
What do you think Obama and Kerry are up to, trying to convince America that ISIS is not Islam and that ISIS is an enemy of Islam, not our enemy, not Israel's enemy, but an enemy of Islam? What's that about? What planet are these guys living on?
Well, I think something is going on here, and I tell you what, in fairness, even George Bush, in many of his speeches, they tried to make a distinction between peace-loving Muslims and terrorists. They try to do that, and the reason they do that is they do not want to have violence in this country, for example. They don't want Muslims to be targeted now indiscriminately in our country by Americans that might be enraged at what's going on abroad. So that's one reason. So they try to tamp down any animosity against the Muslim faith. But I don't think that that's going to work unless, as I said, we have a frank discussion about the elements of the Muslim faith that condone violence. Yeah. Because the American people are saying, well, wait a minute, there's something not right. But a larger reason, too, is this, Carl, to answer your question, is the President and the Secretary of State are desperately trying to build a coalition of Muslim nations to help defeat ISIS. Mm-hmm. So that's one reason, because especially for the Democrats here at home, they want to be perceived as multilateralists. Remember, they hate George Bush because he was a unilateralist. Right. He didn't build coalitions that were big enough in their view. So one of the reasons that they want to show that their policy is different than the Bush's is they want to say, you see, we are fighting a movement with Muslims who are backing us against an offshoot of the faith which we all reject.
Right.
So they're trying to present themselves as these great multilateralists. Problem is, it isn't working.
Right.
Their coalition is, what are we at, 9 countries, and we still don't know exactly what these 9 countries are going to do. Right. And the Muslim nations are not coming on board.
Right.
So again, there's this element of deception that the American people are perceiving.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. No, that's it. That was a brilliant explanation. And